Hey everyone, this is Dr. Drizzle, and welcome to the National Parks Adventure, Crossing America. Today, we're at Cesar Chavez National Monument in Keene, California. Thank you so much to the National Park Foundation for allowing us to be here today. And we are here with Ranger Miranda. Ranger Miranda, thanks for having us.
Yeah, we're so glad to have y'all.
It is a beautiful day in sunny California, right?
Sure is.
So tell us how you came to be part of the National Park Service.
Sure. So, started out when I was a little girl. My mom would take me on hikes at this local nature park. I was lucky enough to have her as a guide. So that was a good way to entertain me, but also have me develop a relationship with nature and my own body, how it felt when I was out in nature. So that was when I was very young, like 5, 6, 7. And I was very lucky that in school, they took us on a field trip, epic field trip to Yosemite National Park. In about 7th grade, and that planted something in me that I didn't even know was really there. I never had the dream of becoming a park ranger, or at least I didn't recognize it, because I grew up in Los Angeles, in LA, and I didn't see many park rangers, even though they're there if you look for them, and I didn't know any. And to be honest, it wasn't a career that I really saw as a natural progression for a Latina woman. Didn't have a lot of role models in that respect. So I thought I didn't really know what I was gonna do, but I did know that every time I got outside, I felt like myself again. So I went to, middle school, high school, I went into college, and I started out in biology because I knew I wanted to help people and I knew I liked nature. But after some kind of soul searching, I realized that I wanted to actually be outside rather than like a nurse or a doctor. And so I took about a year off, went back to school, and got my degree in earth science and psychology in LA. And I was lucky enough to get an internship through the Geoscientists in Park program. Which is, if you aren't too familiar with what a geoscientist is, they study our Earth and everything to do with it, from the ground to the sky. So I went to Shenandoah National Park, and I hadn't left California very much. So when I saw Shenandoah in Virginia, it was so green, and I was like, what am I going to do there? I'm going to be a fish out of water. But one of my professors, my geology professors, when I told her I was scared, she said, you gotta launch, you gotta go for it. So I finally did, and it was wonderful. I hardly even wanted to come back. It was like I finally had started to fly, so it was awesome. And that started the journey. Once I got, my resume together and started with that, I hopped all over the country.
Tell us a few places that you've been.
Sure. Yeah, I've worked at Cape Hatteras National Seashore, in a lighthouse, Springfield Armory National Historic Site up in Massachusetts, which was one of our nation's first armories. In Arizona, I did a couple of places called Pipe Spring National Monument and Montezuma Castle National Monument. Let's see, Everglades National Park, which is one of my favorites because they really helped kind of light the fire for environmental education that I still have. And I think that's it, but I don't, and here, of course. Yes.
And you've been here how long?
I've been here just over 2 years, and our park is relatively new. We just had our 10th birthday. So yes, we're getting a lot of things in order, and we have a lot of potential to start building these wonderful programs in order to share with the world about the Cesar Chavez and the farm worker history.
Well, we know that you love it here. You talked about how special this place is and how you love to interpret it. So can you do that for us? Tell us a little bit about this place and its namesake.
Sure. We are up in the Tehachapi Mountains, and they are actually kind of removed from the Central Valley of California. Cesar Chavez decided to move the farm worker movement, the headquarters, here in 1970. But let's take it a little bit further back. So Cesar Chavez was born in Arizona in 1927. They had their own farm. Things were okay, but they lost that farm when he was a child. His family had to look for work, and the only place that they could find it was all the way in California as migrant farm laborers. So they had lost their house. He kind of lost that sense of stability, and they started traveling all of the time. These jobs sometimes can last a day or two. And imagine as a kid, you going to school for only a couple of days and then moving again. It would be really hard to keep up on your homework, let alone make new friends, or and then sometimes he had to go to work in the field as well. So he lived this kind of all over life for a while. And then he eventually made it out of the fields. He still was helping people in a community service organization, but he knew that things weren't getting better for the farm workers. He would travel and try to help them in other ways, but he came home to his wife, Helen Chavez, and he said, you know, Helen, things are still terrible for the farm workers. Somebody should really do something. And she said, well, why don't you be the one to do something? You talk about it all the time. And he said, you know what that would mean, right? Because nobody had ever done this successfully before, and they had 8 children, 8 mouths to feed. And they finally had a stable income and a car with gas in it. They had like made it out, right? And she said, yes, I know what that would mean. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of hungry times. So they moved to Delano, California, which is where their families had kind of settled for a while. It's in the Central Valley of California. And they kind of leaned on family there while they figured things out. He was in his 30s when he did this. He wasn't straight out of high school or anything. So he just decided one day that he was going to help people, which anybody can do at any given time. And he went for it. And he knew that he needed to change the world, change people's lives, but he didn't know how he was going to do it. That happens to me sometimes too. And hopefully you have the goal, and then you got to figure out how to do it, right? So he started to talk to farm workers in Delano and the surrounding areas, and he tried to find out what their issues were, what they hoped would change out in the fields, what they were afraid of, and what they were willing to do to help out this mission. He did that for a couple of years, and he wasn't quite ready to get it kick-started with a big bang yet, but there was another group of workers called the Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee. Okay. And they were mostly made up of Filipino farm workers. You didn't have to be a certain ethnicity to get into these unions, but these people didn't have a lot to lean on, so they leaned on their common kind of culture a lot of times. It made them feel comfortable. So that Agricultural Workers Organizing Committee, AWOC for short, they started a strike. And when you go on strike, you don't go into work or you don't go into school. And they let Cesar Chavez's union know. And at the time, it wasn't called United Farm Workers. They called it the NFWA, the National Farm Workers Association. So AWOC approached the NFWA and they said, hey, we're going on strike, and we would really appreciate it if when we left the fields, you didn't go in and take our jobs. Mm-hmm. Because the bosses have historically kind of pitted those groups against each other. So Cesar brought this kind of proposition back to his group and his union. And there was some spirited debate because people were worried. They were worried about going on strike as well, not having an income, and really the danger of what comes when you stand up to the big kind of agricultural boogie monster at the time. So, but they decided that they all had common goals. They were farm workers fighting for human rights. So they decided to join them. And that became the Delano Grape Strike of 1965. You may have heard of it also as the Great Boycott. And when you boycott something, you don't support it. So if you are boycotting grapes, you don't buy grapes, you don't post on social media about how much you love grapes, and you don't do things like that. So it kind of hurts the pocketbooks of the grape growers. That was successful, but it took 5 years. 5 years to get that first agricultural contract with the growers. And so imagine 5 years of not having a job. Of course, these people still ate, but it was really hard to keep going. A lot of people leaned on each other or the religion or whatever could give them kind of faith to keep going.
That is a great story. I mean, it has a lot of endurance in there and persistence. He did not give up. What is another piece of this park that makes it so special?
I think one of my favorite parts about working here at this park is that its reach doesn't stop at the boundary lines. This story is so much bigger than this park, but this is just kind of the home base from which we tell it. I know I grew up in Los Angeles, and I know who Cesar Chavez was as a little girl. I didn't even know what a farm worker was, but I knew that this person had brown skin, they were Latino, and they weren't ashamed of it. They weren't sitting down anymore, they were standing up. And that meant a lot to me, and he was one of my heroes, even though history wasn't my best subject. So around here, you can reach people's hearts without them ever actually being in a field, them believing in themselves, and I think that's one of the strongest and most impactful parts of this story.
So we know that his heart was in this. Like, this was a passion, even at loss to him with 8 kids, right?
Yeah.
But he decided he wanted to do more. In fact, there's a quote on the wall back here that says, "It is my deepest belief that only by giving our lives do we find life." And so basically that's what he did. We know that in 2012, I believe, President Obama designated this as a national monument. Where are we standing right now?
We are standing in the Memorial Garden. So right up here is where Cesar and Helen Chavez are laid to rest. Cesar Chavez passed away first, but they made sure to leave a spot for Helen. She wanted to make sure that Cesar was never alone. And that's part of the reason why she approved of the Park Service coming in. The Park Service runs very kind of sentimental places here. Even though the larger area of Nuestra Señora Reina de la Paz is 187 acres, pretty big. An acre is the size of a football field. The Park Service only manages 2. Those 2 acres hold our visitor center, which has the office of Cesar Chavez, which is just a few steps that way. And over here is where they are buried. So that's a really close distance. Not too far away is also the Chavez home. Those are all so special. If you can imagine your mother and father kind of leaving those. So she wanted to make sure that they would be taken care of for all of perpetuity, or in other words, forever.
We like to think about how we can help out national park places, sites, memorials, landmarks, monuments. What are some challenges that you face here, even after the death of Cesar Chavez? There are probably still some challenges that you face as a park.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked that. So even though Cesar Chavez spent the rest of his life fighting for better lives for the farm workers, not just in the fields, but out of the fields as well, things aren't perfect, right? When we are humans and we have these complex interactions, it's not just a one and done fix. You have to keep working at it. So people are still working at it, but things are still not fair and humane for the farm workers out there. So that's one of the challenges that we face, that this story is not over. We tell a very important part of the story, especially for when Cesar was alive, but one of the most special things about working in this place as well is that this is living history here. I work with a lot of members of the Chavez family, but they're just normal, good people that have it in their heart, just like Chavez did, Cesar Chavez, excuse me, to make the world a better place for the people that are in it.
Well, I think that will lead us into a call to action for our students today.
Sure.
To see if we can continue to be part of this living history so that it's not one and done, as you said, it's continued. So kids, we're going to be looking at the UN Sustainability Goals, number 13, climate action, which talks about all kinds of things, including agriculture, but we're also going to look at goals 1 and 2 for no poverty and no hunger. So what we would like you to do, we talked about this earlier before we got on camera, and we're excited for you to research, starting number 1, research where your food comes from. Can you do that for us? If you live in an area where there are farmers around you, go interview the farmers, find out about them and their families. Find out how many generations they've been doing this. Maybe ask them, can you spend part of a day with them, sort of walking in their shoes to see how your food actually gets to your table. Now, some of us live in places where we can do sort of that farm to table, where we can go out and we can pick the corn and then we can shuck the corn and put it into our ovens or put it on top of the stove and we eat that. Some of you live in urban areas where your food comes from the grocery store, but it didn't just come from there. So we want you to think about how you can talk to the produce department and find out, where did this come from? Where were these bananas shipped from? How was this here? How are these things protected? Are there any pesticides that were used on those? At the very beginning of our time today, Ranger Miranda talked about how being outdoors is good for your body also. So let's just think about how we're all in this circle, and what we eat is what we become, basically. So we want you to figure out where all this comes from. You can create some type of map that you can share with Ranger Miranda, but we want you to go further. As you identify problems that you may see in areas around you dealing with the farmers or the farms around you, we want you to make a list of those and start thinking, how can you help them or elevate their voice? Cesar Chavez basically did that. He elevated the voices of those who may not have been heard otherwise. How can you do that? So number 3, and again, this is a big challenge today, but I know you're up to it. We want you to see how you can become a good human. So we want you to talk to your teachers and your principals and your communities and think about what you could grow in your schoolyard that's sustainable. Can you grow something that you can use to feed your school? How about feed some of the people that are less fortunate than you? Or look for some people that don't have the means to have a garden in their own yard. See, the basic part of this whole challenge today, the reason we're here is that Cesar Chavez had a mission. He had a passion. Let's continue that mission. Let's continue to be good humans, to figure out how we can provide for all of us so that it's not just a certain type of people that get more than others. I'm excited to see what you're going to create. So first of all, you're going to share that with us on social media at Dacia92. Look at the bottom of the screen. You're going to find the social media accounts for Cesar Chavez National Monument. And we also want you to tag the National Park Foundation with the hashtag of Crossing America. Ranger Miranda would love to share this with the staff here, but also the Chavez family, to let them know that there are thousands of kids around the country who have heard this story today and have been inspired to be a good human, just like the Chavez family. I can't wait to see what they create, because I think challenges like this, when we encourage kids to be good humans and to open up their arms to other people, is what's going to make our world a better place. And who better to do that than our rising generation of world changers? Thinking about that, what advice would you have for students who are sitting in their classroom who are really excited about this story, but also about being a national park ranger? Can you give them some advice and just look in that middle camera?
Sure. So I was telling Dacia a little bit about how when I was younger, I did not think I could be a park ranger. It was the farthest thing from my mind. I was like the same thing as an astronaut. But if you want to do it, you can do it. So you can study a lot of different things in school if you want. It just depends on what you're interested in. We have a lot of different types of rangers. We have rangers like me who talk to kids like you, or people like Dacia that come in, and we have law enforcement rangers that help us make sure that the parks are safe. We also have people that work with animals like bears or mountain lions, and those are a certain type of ranger as well. And we also have people that love the plants that like to work with them all day. So there's a place for you in the National Park Service if you want to be a part of it. You have to go to an official website when you're a little bit older called usajobs.gov. But before then, if you want to kind of get a feel of being in your national parks and help out your community as well, you can also volunteer at any time.
I think that's great advice, Miranda. I think it gets kids excited and it gets them started on a path of what they want to do. Going back to your original story, you were hiking when you were young. Your mom did that for you. She introduced you. So we want the kids to start young, thinking about what they want to do, and they're basically just to change the world. And I think they can do that.
And I want to also recognize that not everybody has an adult that can take them out. They're not, maybe that's just not what life has dealt them. So I've made it my mission to bring any kid that I can to kind of bridge that gap outdoors so they can kind of discover that for themselves, because I want everybody to experience that as well.
So teachers, remember, we don't all start from the same place. So let's make that a little bit more equitable and get our kids outside so that they can learn more about this great place that we live in and learn how to make a difference in the world.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having us out here today.
We loved having you, yeah.
We are going to put a picture of your dog up here because you missed this part, but the dog ran through our scene and her name was?
Isla.
Isla, and we love to have animals. We've had pika and deer and elk and squirrel. This is our first dog, and we love that. So on behalf of Dr. Drizzle and Ranger Miranda and her dog Isla, thank you so much for having us, and thank you to the National Park Foundation for their collaboration. We're out of here.
Bye.